Looking for a fight, you'll have to find me in the forest in Northside Norfolk, Ward's Corner near the water of the James. Rolling with some former orphans, eating oranges and peeling off in cheap foreigns. It's the Prius gang. Content warning. This video is going to talk about all kinds of extreme subject matter. I mean, everything that Kendrick Lamar has accused Drake of, and what I think it means for millennial culture. And if you don't know what that is, if you haven't been following that beef, this video, I will try to make this accessible to people who don't know who Kendrick Lamar and Drake are, who kind of have been living under a rock. And that's saying something coming from me. I spent 10 years in a bedroom, but I spent a lot of that time listening to Kendrick Lamar. So this is something I've kind of been anticipating for a very long time. Like, I have been waiting for Kendrick Lamar and Drake to go to war at least since the Control verse, where I was expecting that to just happen. This, to me, is kind of a generation-defining moment, and I think it may possibly be the climax of the millennial generation culturally. I think this is the cultural climax of the millennial generation. It's Drake versus Kendrick Lamar. And I say that because they are two of the most defining artists of my generation, and I'm 2 years younger than Kendrick Lamar, I think. I'm not sure how old Drake is, but it can't be much more than that. I'm 33 this year, so that means Kendrick Lamar is 35, Drake is at least 35. When Eminem was famous, when he was first blowing up, when he was young, when I was very young, he was saying things like, if I turn 30, just kill me, because that means I'm on the wrong side of culture at that point, you know? Many celebrated artists we lost before their 30s. The entire manga 20th Century Boys is about Gen Xers reaching my age and realizing that they did not die in their 20s and become cultural icons like Kurt Cobain, or for my generation it would be Amy Winehouse. She would have been one of the earlier millennials. I would put myself towards the back end of the millennial generation. And if you don't know what is considered a millennial, basically anyone born between like 1980 and 1994, pretty much the first generation to have the existence of the internet as a informative part of culture, and also I think the 24-hour news cycle. I think those are the defining attributes of millennials, is that we grew up with those things. And not all millennials grew up with the internet necessarily. Like, it was sort of, you know, I was an early adopter of the internet and I'm a young millennial. So I would say, like, growing up with the internet being a casual part of your life is more of a Zoomer thing. But like, knowing that it exists at all, you know, the fact of its existence, what its existence brought culture, that all started taking effect you know, when I was growing up. And in my most formative years, my teen years, is when, you know, MySpace and Facebook blew up, and when the modern idea of social media came to be. YouTube blew up, you know? So like, the people who have been at the top of those platforms, the people who have been the most informative to that culture, there's a long list of names, but like, music is one of the most global, one of the most influential, one of the most insistent, insidious, like, easiest ways for culture to transpire. And so for people to be at the top of music for a generation is like, it's hard to imagine having more pervasive cultural influence than that. It's just something that can reach across all these different cultures so much more easily than many other works of art can. So I think that, you know, Drake, he has been literally the biggest musician of his generation for a decade. A whole decade plus, maybe more than that. He's been unfathomably famous for a very long time. And Kendrick Lamar has never really even been on that same echelon of actual fame, because it's an interesting conversation to have about these two guys, because what they're battling for right now is to be the voice of the millennial generation. That's what I see this battle as. It's not about who is the best rapper. Kendrick Lamar said, it's not about who's the best, it's about love and hate. And I'm the biggest hater. I hate the way you walk, you talk, the way that you dress. He hates what Drake represents. He hates what Drake inspires. He hates what Drake has created in the world. He wants no more Drakes. He wishes Drake had never been a big influence. He wishes it had been him. He wishes he had been the one who was the biggest influence all along. But what if he was? What if actually through this beef he's proven that he was the more influential one all along? Because Drake being the most successful rapper, the richest rapper, is not because he is the best rapper. It never has been. Rap is a part of what he does. But it's more that rap is a unique avenue into pop music that he took. He's somebody who found his way into making pop by way of rap. Whereas Kendrick is somebody who went and made rap music, and then because of the fact that Drake existed as something he had to compete with in order to say, like, I'm the number one rapper because I have the number one single, he had to make his rap poppy enough to break that ceiling. But I don't think Kendrick eventually started having all these number ones because his music got more pop. I think it's because his influence had permeated culture to an extent that every time he comes back around, more people know who he is. More people already understand his message. And it's not even because they've necessarily heard him speak. They've heard people who are influenced by him speak. And so if you've been listening to any millennial rapper, all of us look at Kendrick Lamar as the big brother of our generation, the big cousin, the one that we've been taking notes from, the one that, has, whether it's just because of the fact that he's, had the most critical adulation, or because his message just connects with more people than anybody else, or, the fact that he can connect and produce these massive sales, like, just the level of respect and influence towards him, that was felt immediately. Like, Good Kid, Mad City came out, and then YG put out an album that did the exact same fucking concept. JID owes his whole fucking career to the existence of Kendrick Lamar. Denzel Curry basically, said he was looking to Kendrick Lamar and Drake as those two guys are sensitive, and that's why they're successful. That's why I'm going to be sensitive and show my sensitivity. And when he did that, he broke through. So, it's not like a secret. It's like everybody knows these are the most influential guys, and that there's a compounding effect of that, where if people keep saying it, it keeps becoming more true. And for Kendrick, essentially, his whole identity is based on the idea that he has to be responsible as the leader of this generation. He put that crown on from the very start. He said, I'm the leader of the new school. That's literally a bar from a Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe remix, where he started off his career by getting all the cosigns from everybody that was at the top of the game before him. Everybody that was already in their late 30s and already making all the money, So he got the cosigns from Dr. Dre, from Jay-Z, anybody who was a heavy hitter, and if he didn't, then he called them out. He didn't want to work with Diddy. He said Puff Daddy wasn't your favorite. I don't think he ever wanted to be involved with people he didn't think were real and that were on message with what he's trying to do. And I think when he met Drake, he thought that Drake was just like him. And keep in mind, they would have both been like 22, 23. Like, there wasn't a standard to hold one another to yet that there became over 12 years of maturity, of Kendrick becoming the actual father of the new school and an actual father, and Drake being the irresponsible, the guy who's still trying to act the same way he acted when he was 23 now that he's 37. And Kendrick's like, it's not cool no more, this is not the look. This is not what the culture represents anymore. Drake seems to mature in reverse. That's funny. I think when they met, Kendrick did not have a problem with Drake on the level that he was going to. I think he looked at it as this dude was already more successful than him. He was a little older. He broke earlier. You know, he was already becoming one of the biggest megastars in the world at the time that they worked together, they toured together. He featured on Poetic Justice. At the time that these artists came out, I was not like particularly following hip hop. It was that generation of hip hop had kind of been passing me by up until Kendrick came out. And then because of the fact that I was listening to everything that was influenced by him, everything created in the wake of Kendrick became the hip hop that I came up with, you know, through my 20s. And that inspired me to then make it myself. And you know, I'm sure there are plenty of people who would have been rapping with or without Kendrick, but who would have never gotten popular if he didn't make it so you could do like funny voices and be weird and be super sentimental and really go in depth with characters and like just do all this groundbreaking shit that people were doing, but nobody made it mainstream like that. You know, nobody connected it to that many people the way he did. It always made sense for Drake and Kendrick to be in separate lanes, and for you to think like, well, this guy's the party rapper and this guy's the emotional rapper. But the question was always like does party rap have to be vapid, and can emotional rap not be more successful? You know, like if you look through music history, it's not like it's always been the turn up party shit that is the most successful. Like Michael Jackson may be, you know, the most successful guy ever. In like Thriller is the biggest album, and even that, not every song on it is like a turn up song or a dance song necessarily. But like if you look at some of the other biggest albums like Bat Out of Hell by fucking Meatloaf or Hybrid Theory by Linkin Park, like these are not turn up albums. These are like very particular emotional storytelling. They're just good stories told through music that connected with lots of people all over the world, you know? And so if you really are looking at Kendrick and Drake beyond the realm of like who's the more successful rapper, who is the more successful artist, who is the better musician, whose music has affected people, Drake's music is capable of being popular for all sorts of different reasons, many of which have to do with manipulation within the industry. So a lot of it's not even really connected to how much people like the music. It's more about how acceptable the music is. Drake's music is easy to listen to for people of my generation. People got used to his voice. They had grown up seeing him on Degrassi. He was already kind of culturally iconic before he was even a musician. And then he translated that into music fame, you know, and he was very self-insistent, which is a success necessity, as I've said many times. You know, it took a Donald Trump level of approach to his career of like, yeah, I'm number one, I'm staying number one, I'm always going to be number one, that's my persona, that's my character, I'm number one, I'm Big Daddy, I'm Big Pappy, I'm the fucking party man. But what that means, if you're trying to be the coolest guy, that means you have to represent what is cool to your culture. What do people think is cool? Do people think it's cool to, you know, be constantly passed out on Xans? Like, that's basically what it is to the late 2010s. It was a depressing time. Most people who are sensitive just couldn't handle it. And, you know, we began this massive opioid crisis we've got in the country. And so at this time where, you know, Drake is toned down from the level of Lil Wayne being literally constantly drinking lean, but he's rapping about passing out on a plane and doing Xan, you know, like, because he's stressed. Like, that's the way that he connected with my generation, was being like very mellow, very sad, upset about his relationships, you know, and being tragically honest about it. You know, like, you could laugh at a lot of the stuff he says being cringe, but the reason that connects is because most people are cringe. Most people have those cringeworthy emotions. And I think, you know, I think Drake has a way of spinning that cringeworthiness to still come off kind of cool and like self-satisfying. You know, it's cope music, which is essentially also what Kendrick accuses him of. He says, I make music to electrify him, you make music to pacify him. So, you know, that's Drake's purpose, is to make music that's just easy to listen to, that can be binged, and that's why he's always had those stream numbers. But again, where's the influence? Because yeah, people have tried to sound like Drake, but like in terms of what he's saying, nothing he was saying like had a depth to it that you would want to imitate. Where you don't want to be, you don't want to be saying the stuff Drake is saying if you're not Drake. Like, he's pulling it off because he's Drake, but like, you know, if somebody else is doing it, it's like, oh, you realize, actually, I don't want to be that guy. You know, like, it's nice that somebody is out there being the cringe one for the rest of us, but like, I wouldn't want to actually be that guy. Kendrick Lamar, you want to be him. You look at what he's saying, you look at what he's doing, you're like, if I was my best self, I would be approaching my life the way this guy is, because he's dedicated. At least that's what he's presenting through his music. Like, I don't know that Kendrick Lamar in his day-to-day is, you know, always on the grind of self-betterment, and a lot of his music is also about his failures in that department. A lot of why he can connect is because he also talks about, I mean, on Damn, he gets really on the cringeworthy side, but he doesn't try to make it cool. He tries to make it pathetic and gross. You know, let me put the head in. Oh, I don't want more than that. Girl, I respect the cat. Like, ugh, gross, sleazy, you know? But that's the point. He's not trying to glorify everything he does as, well, I did it, therefore it's cool. And that's Drake's approach. And again, like, that's kind of a young person's game. And it's also kind of what every young rapper is doing. Like, everybody who's coming from a place of insecurity is just reifying that everything they do is cool, you know, and that they do cool things. But if everybody's doing the same cool things, it just kind of makes you all unidentifiable. Like, you got to have some kind of unique swagger, or else it's eventually like, well, what do you bring? Like, we're tired of you, you know? And like, it's crazy that it took so long for people to really get tired of Drake. I think it just is because it takes a long time to really identify someone beyond their art. Like, most people don't really listen that closely to lyrics. It's only really the fans, the people who start, you know, taking influence from it, that are gonna parse it down to that level, especially with rap, where like you have to have a certain amount of like exposure to it to even be able to like pick out words from beat like that. There's lots of artists who they start to have a public image and they quickly fall apart because people realize that the person is not likable. And like with Drake, he's always been so good at playing like the heel when he, it's weird that he's been able to like go back and forth, right, of like being the bad guy and the good guy, but it's just because there's always going to be people who just worship whoever's at the top. Like, if you make the most money, if you are seen as the most successful, there is always a cult in the name of success within any medium. So like, you know, in the rap game, there's always going to be a sizable portion of people whose opinion is just whoever is number one, that is God. I really think that's the only reason that Kendrick has ever even attempted to compete on that level. He has never wanted the money. He's never wanted the fame. He wants the title of absolute rap god, and he thinks it's unfair that you can get that through manipulating statistics, through using ghostwriters, through teaming up. Like, you know, he just doesn't think that having the most money and the most streams should qualify you as the number one rapper. And he's right to say so as well, because I mean, with Drake, the only qualifier actually is he's not the richest. You know, he doesn't make the most money. He just has the most streams. And if that's something that can be achieved through manipulation, and by Kendrick's accusations is, and has to be, like, just by basic thought and logic, has to be true. If being the biggest streamer isn't really meaningful culturally, then what is the next thing? Like, what is special about you then? You know, what is there to Drake besides being the most streamed artist? What are we supposed to look up to? And, you know, I think you can make a nuanced case for why there are still aspects of Drake that are cool or that work, or why he's been able to maintain success. A lot of people are going to be more fair to Drake than I am. I've never been a Drake fan, so, you know, I'm a Kendrick Lamar stan all the way, for sure. That's the angle that you're getting in this video. I can't do another angle. You know, I can appreciate why Drake. I appreciate that he is talented, that he is intelligent, but I do not appreciate how people can look in the face of what Kendrick is presenting about his stream numbers and still say that is an argument for him being the #1 rapper. And if that's not an argument, what is? You know, and there is none. With Kendrick, the arguments, you can find an infinite number of them online, you know, and with Kendrick, the conversation is about whether he is literally the greatest rapper of all time. Whether or not he's the greatest of our generation is not even really up for debate. Like, depends on what like, if you consider Eminem a millennial, I would consider him probably an exennial, which is like the generation right before. You know, he very much created millennial culture. So, like, in that sense, if you're somebody who believes that, like, whatever, like, you cannot, if you think that you can't call Kendrick the greatest because you couldn't have a Kendrick without an Eminem, and you couldn't call Eminem the greatest because you couldn't have Eminem without LL Cool J, you know, like, you have to say that the greatest is Grandmaster Flash, and then, like, it all comes down from there, you know, down the tubes. But, like, but if we're just arguing, like, who's the greatest of this generation, and we don't, like, we don't presuppose that Kendrick cannot be the greatest of all time, there are tons of arguments for why he is the greatest of all time. And I can't dispute it. I have nobody else is even close for me. I've gone in search, I've been trying to find a rapper who I would like more, like, who I would put above Kendrick, and I just can't. I can't find it. So, people say Doom, Doom, too samey. Not enough, nowhere near the level of creative breadth that Kendrick has had over his career. Just not even close, in my mind. Kendrick's catalog is fucking nuts. It's absolutely nuts. It's beyond compare. And a part of that is just, like, living long enough, you know? Like, maybe Tupac's catalog or Biggie's catalog would be comparable to that if they lived longer, but Kendrick's the one who is pushing 40, you know? And we're really in the first generation of active rappers in their 40s. Like, you know, Danny Brown, on his new album About Being 40, he basically starts off like, you're still doing this at 40? Like, that's the attitude people have towards him. Because it doesn't make money. Like, not really. And this is something I really wanted to get into, as I called this stream the Millennial War on Pedophiles, and I think it's going to eventually evolve into the Zoomers' war on billionaires. At least I hope so. And, you know, I'm not suicidal, so if I die anytime soon, a billionaire killed me because of my opinions on billionaires. I guarantee it. But because they have the power to do that, and it's the reason they're so successful. I really, as I've moved through the industry and examined the way that people work within the industry, like, I really think you have to consider people's intentions of, like, why do they want what they want? Why do you want $1 billion? What could you possibly do with $1 billion? Like, most of us can't even imagine what we would do with $100 million. Couldn't imagine what I would do with it. Because I know that I could accomplish anything I can imagine with less money than that. You know, like, at some point, I'm just going to start wasting money. I mean, I guess I could find people I trust and give them that money. But at that point, that's not really me. You know, that's just me basically divesting myself of the responsibility of figuring out how to spend $100 million. So why would you want hundreds of millions, billions of dollars? What are you trying to accomplish? This is an integral question to me for all of the industry. Like, I've met so many creatives who live on very little and are fine with it. Like, people who tour in small circuits where maybe they're only playing shows on one coast, or people who only do conventions and, you know, tour seasonally, put out an album every year but it's always self-published, re-release tracks on different platforms. Like,
if you're not trying to support a family, if you're just totally by yourself, you don't have to make that much money to live unless you're trying to do something expensive. Now, if you're trying to put your whole family up, if you're trying to put your whole community up, if you're literally trying to flip your block and make it, if you're trying to be Nipsey Hussle, first of all, good luck not getting shot, and second of all, like, that's incredible dedication and effort and forethought and intelligence necessary to make all that happen, and most people can barely even fucking take care of themselves. So when I think about how much effort it takes to make a lot of money, why? What could you possibly want? Now, I do think some of them just want to have the most money. Like Jeff Bezos, that's a guy I look at and I'm like, that guy just thinks that he is supposed to, like, his purpose in life is to be the richest man. And then he accomplished that. And now he's just kind of fucking around or whatever, because it's like he did it. He did his life goal. Almost nobody else is competitive enough to actually chase that. I think there's a lot of people who would like the glory, but actually what they're looking for is the side action. It's whatever else they're getting out of it. What do you need $1 billion to do? There's nothing that costs that much to do. Some people are like hoarders. They're just like really rich hoarders. Like you got like that one Saudi prince who just owns like garages worth of classic cars that are just like fallen to rust, like because they've just been basically entombed in Egyptian style to come with him to the fucking afterlife or whatever. Like there's some level of just like paranoid schizophrenic psychosis coupled with lucky opportunities that leads crazy people to have lots of money. But I think usually they're trying to get away with something. Usually they're trying to cover up their past, they're trying to run away from something, they're trying to continue to do something evil that they want to be able to do. Why else do you need so much money? Or you're Kanye West and you have a God complex. Like, I think Ye and Kendrick are closer to the same boat of they think that they can personally heal culture. And Ye is just willing to take much bigger risks, and taking those big risks creates all kinds of drama and difficulty. It makes his personal life difficult. It makes him hard to be around. It makes it hard for his family. Kendrick doesn't want that. Kendrick wants his family to be, he cares more about taking care of his family than he cares about being a cultural influence. That's why he bowed out of hip hop. Motherfucker had a kid and said, I'm basically done. He made Mr. Morale, as he said in these new diss tracks, he basically made that to inspire the children of the next generation. He wants the kids growing up. He basically packed all of his lessons that he learned in that 10 years that he'd been king of hip-hop, put it all into an album. This is for you, kids. So why does he have to beef with Drake? Well, because I think Kendrick was comfortable that as long as he kept saying, I'm number one, and nobody's openly disputing him saying that, it means that it's true. He literally called himself Mr. 1 through 5 on Damn, said smoking on your top 5 tonight in Family Ties. Like, he truly believes that he is the top 5 rappers, not the number 1. He is the top 5. I more or less agree with him on this. But, so, the conversation culturally keeps revolving around this big 3. And the reason for this big 3 conversation is mostly just that people always compare J. Cole to Kendrick Lamar. They blew up around the same time. They were the 2 conscious rappers of the era. They appealed to kind of really different audiences, because J. Cole appeals to like dumb conscious people, and Kendrick Lamar appeals to smart conscious people. But again, also Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole created a new generation of intelligence. They both grew up, they both matured, they both became better and smarter as they went. So, I'm not totally harsh on Cole. I still think he's kind of a fucking idiot. But we all are. the fact that people kept comparing Cole to Kendrick and their fan bases have always kind of been in this conversation of who's better is the main reason that Cole is in this conversation at all. And he recognized that and bowed out of this battle, rightfully so. He figured this out. Somehow he recognized this after he caused the other two to go to war. Or maybe that was his intent from the start. It's hard to know. Maybe he just wanted to give Kendrick the layup to destroy Drake's career. To me, the conversation has really always been, is the number one most streamed rapper the number one rapper, or is the most respected, beloved, talented rapper the number one rapper? Kendrick's always insisted it's the latter, and unless Drake directly challenged it, there was no reason to think that Drake didn't agree. So then when J. Cole said, you know, I might be number one out of this big three, Kendrick said, fuck a big three, it's just big me. Drake responded by dissing Kendrick and a whole bunch of other people, and Kendrick started laying in on Drake. That's how we got into this whole conflict. And by laying in, I mean he released a diss track, then 2 days later released another diss track. Drake responded. Kendrick responded to that response immediately, and then dropped a fourth diss track, to which Drake dropped another response that was so bad, Kendrick has not had to say anything yet. Because it kind of looks like Drake just shot himself in the ass and gave up, and Kendrick's song is the number one song in America. Two of these songs have been the number one song in America. This is fascinating to me, especially because, again, Kendrick did not have a number one hit until Humble in 2017. By that point, he'd already been around for 5 years, having hit songs that just weren't number ones. So I really do think it was cultural recognition. It wasn't that Humble was such a better song or so much more accessible than fucking Swimming Pools or whatever. It was just Kendrick's cultural cachet was still growing. And it is still growing. Because on Mr. Morale, he had even bigger hits. And I don't even think those songs were as good as any of his previous hits. And now he's got these songs that aren't even, like, songs. They are battle raps. Battle raps are the number one song in the country. That's insanity. That's never happened before. Well, I guess Drake's, if you count Drake's diss on Meek Mill, I believe that had gone to number one. But what was considered special about that, what everybody praised Drake for in that beef, was that he created this club song that was like a song in and of itself that also disses Meek Mill, and therefore it's like an eternal song. Like that diss will always exist out there. Kendrick did not do that. Kendrick's number one song, the hook, the memorable line, is him shouting, "Certified lover boy, certified pedophiles." There's not a lot of battle raps where somebody just calls the other guy a pedophile. But you know where it happens a lot? Internet blood sports. Twitter. It happens all the time in the places where my generation hangs out. Calling your opponent a pedophile is like part and parcel debate 101 for the millennial generation. Why is this so effective? Why, if it is so effective, has it never been a tactic before? That's what I want to tackle more than anything with this rant here. We're really getting into the heat of it now. This is going to be a lot of anecdotal, historical perspective. But I think that the Me Too movement is the defining aspect of millennial culture. I think it's the biggest, most effective thing our culture has done. There have been negative ramifications of it, but overall it's very positive. And to me, this is the climax of it. This is the ultimate Me Too, basically. Kendrick Lamar Me Too'd Drake and called him a pedophile on behalf of women who won't speak out or who've been paid and are, happy with the money they got. So, Um, when I was growing up, the concept of a casting couch was like a sitcom joke. It wasn't obscure cultural reference. We knew that like women were sleeping with producers for careers. This was commonplace knowledge. It was considered a joke. It was considered funny. When I was young, it wasn't unusual for grown men to leer after young women, teenage girls, particularly if they're, post development but still underage. Guys are going to joke about, still hot. Now, what's different? What has changed in our culture that's not acceptable anymore? I think mostly psychology. A revolution in psychology, in understanding how people, developmental psychology in particular, and just how much of an effect sex has on people. I think there's many of us from the millennial generation who feel or would argue that even in your 20s you're not really ready for sex, which is why we have the most virginal generation of all time. People have come to really understand what effect their upbringing is having on them in a way that people didn't used to because they wouldn't talk about it. Because culturally, well, the pedophiles were in charge, or they've always been in charge. I mean, basically what I'm saying about billionaires, why would you want, what compels someone to take the most power they can possibly have other than trying to cover up doing the most evil things they possibly can? So, the Catholic Church expose of the early 2000s was a huge eye-opening moment where, all these people who've been shamed into lying, shamed into feeling guilty about what happened to them when they were children, now recognize that it's not their fault, that, culture does not accept or want to protect these types of people anymore. So I really do think that there was a massive pendulum swing in the 90s against sex, basically, against particularly sex in youth culture. And part of it is puritanical, part of it is, imposed by adults who are ashamed of themselves and ashamed of how sleazy the 70s and the 80s were. But I think a lot of it is also self-policing from my generation. I grew up, avoiding sex. It wasn't that I wasn't exposed, it's that I didn't want to be exposed to it. And I think that the fact that there was this massive cultural conversation around Michael Jackson and whether he was a pedophile in the 90s opened up a big part of this conversation. I think, again, the existence of a 24-hour news media cycle that makes it so when someone commits a crime or is suspected of a crime, especially a celebrity, it becomes, a talking point for all of culture for a time. There's just a lot of things that conspired to bring this to the forefront of culture, and particularly in the early 2000s, again, with the church expose, with the internet not only exposing people like me, my generation, to sexual content through the internet at an alarmingly young age, but also people telling their stories on the internet and us finding out just how pervasive, sexual misconduct is and what effects it has on people because people are sharing their emotions on the internet. And so whether or not you have ever gone to therapy or whether or not you actually understand things psychologically, if you've just talked to people who've been through these experiences and you have empathy for them, then, or, you've seen enough of people's stories, it just creates that anger, that righteousness towards this thing that I think was just considered more passé before, where it was just kind of like, oh, well, that's Uncle Tom, he likes him young or whatever. And now it's like, we need to never speak to Uncle Tom. We need to do something about Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom's a problem. Keep your kids away from Uncle Tom, And I think about just the volume of people that I've known in my life who have experience with, child molesters in their family it only takes there being one pedophile to molest every child in a family. You know, like, it's crazy how many people have been affected and never been able to speak on it because they didn't want to destroy their family, or they didn't want to be seen as a liar. They didn't want to be turned against if that person has more power than them, especially as a child. So, you know, it's, again, I think only now that we really understand, like, how big of an issue this is and the importance of protecting against it. So, you know, if you are Drake, and when you started becoming cool, you as a Canadian where the age of consent is lower, you know, are just thinking it's no big deal that you're into young girls because you think that's what cool guys do or whatever. Like, that probably did fly at the time. But now, retroactively, people are looking at that behavior and saying, well, Kendrick is saying you're still like this. You know, Kendrick is saying that you're 37 now and you're still messing around with these young girls and, you know, being this manipulative person and being this toxic influence, not just on, you know, your personal relationships, but also on culture. The way that you represent yourself is toxic. Whether or not you yourself are a pedophile, you hang out with them, and that is basically that's what you're backing. You represent the force that is protecting this behavior, you know? And I look at the numbers, right? So it seems like Kendrick, you know, he's accusing Drake's camp of pedophilia more so than Drake himself. We have the receipts on Drake being a degenerate gambler, that he's got a gambling addiction. Part of the reason he needs so much money would be so that he can make these high-stakes gambles. But Drake has like $500 million. Kendrick Lamar has like $90 million. $90 million is an amount of money I can rationalize having. When in this rap beef, Kendrick Lamar said, I think people like Drake and Weinstein should get fucked up in a cell. And then Drake said, that Epstein angle you took is corny. Now, to me, that's the most damning self-report he possibly could have done. I don't know if it was an accident. I don't know if he was trying to make Kendrick sound more ridiculous by making it seem like he was comparing him to someone he couldn't possibly be as bad as. But, like, what Weinstein has been accused of is not even on the tier of what Epstein has been accused of. So for Drake to make that leap, like, Kendrick basically suggested that Drake is interested in too young of women, hangs out with pedophiles, and because of his, you know, because of OVO, because of his camp, there is like sex trafficking going on that he could be held responsible for, essentially. Drake basically just made it sound like he's pimping out young girls to politicians. Like, that's what an Epstein comparison is. So that's insane. Yeah, there was also the, he says about a teenager he wouldn't look twice. That is, yeah, well, you're not supposed to look once, buddy. So, you know, it's just, aside from Drake just being incredibly sus, I think the reason these accusations stand is that people have always kind of thought Drake was like this, you know? And in Euphoria, Kendrick said, we don't like the women you date because they confuse themselves as real women. Notice I said we, it's because I'm what the culture's feeling. Kendrick knew that people would buy into it. He knew that unless there was pushback against Euphoria, right? If people said, oh, Drake, we don't have a problem with the women Drake's dates. What are you talking about, Kendrick? The culture has no problem with that. If that had been the response, Kendrick would not have been able to pull the trigger on certified lover boys, certified pedophiles. But because of the fact that it's true, and people do know that Drake dates too young of women, and people have always been annoyed with his relationships and his lack of maturity over the years, it all rings true. And it's an interesting cudgel to be able to hit a guy with, right? Like, I'm just imagining, like, imagine if you were in a rap beef with 50 Cent and you tried to like pin him on being a pedophile. He just wouldn't fucking care. You know, like it's an interesting cultural moment and place where the again, the only reason Kendrick has ever even had to put himself at the forefront of culture at all is because of the fact that Drake chose rap. That rap, if and wasn't and didn't become Kendrick about it. You know, if, in another reality where Drake decided that he was going to try to be more like Kendrick and worked with him and took notes from him and ended up making To Pimp a Butterfly with Kendrick, Drake would be the most respected guy in hip hop. If Kendrick had just ghost wrote Drake's career, Drake would be the most respected guy in hip hop. There's no reason to think Drake wouldn't have done that, or Kendrick wouldn't have done that, because Kendrick didn't want to be famous. He didn't want to be rich. He's not. He's not that famous, not that rich. He's just that influential. And if Drake had had that influence on his side, he could not have lost this rap beef. But instead, Drake spent the last 10 years being the same guy, and Kendrick spent the last 10 years continuing to evolve, continuing to inspire and impress and change the culture. And that new culture, you know, that the end result of that culture rejects Drake. It says, like, if what Kendrick is saying is true, then we want him to be the voice of our generation, not you. You know, like, this was always kind of a debate for our generation, but now it's not a debate anymore. But it was, again, I think it was only ever a debate because Drake had the most streams, and I don't think if Drake had ever actually been more influential than Kendrick, that he could have lost. You know, regardless of whatever accusations. He could have beat Kendrick on the, if he, you know, he accused Kendrick of beating his wife. Whether that's true or not, he could have won on just having something to pin on Kendrick if he was actually more beloved, but he's not. He just has more streams. And this finally proved it. Because now Kendrick has more streams and more approval and, you know, is finally sort of sitting in the, you know, the unassailable position that he has always been saying he was in. Yeah, I really look at this as the culmination of my generation's culture. It's, you know, it's the two most impactful artists really discussing who actually has more impact. And Kendrick basically saying, like, Drake, you have had a ton of impact, but it's negative. You've had negative impact, and the sooner you stop having that negative impact, the better. And the culture basically saying, yeah, you know what, you're right. Kendrick, we should have listened to you all along. Good thing we did. Good thing we did listen to you all along, you know, but we'll stop listening to that guy now, you know. Both those lose to Lady Gaga on impact. I think Lady Gaga... Maybe. It's hard to say, though, because Lady Gaga kind of... I think... I don't want to say that she's, like, inevitable, but I don't think she's necessarily as original as Kendrick in terms of what she brings to culture. Like, it's harder to say where her influence lies, right? Because she kind of was Madonna 2.0. Like, in the 80s and 90s, you already had this, like, provocateur, you know, fashionista, pop goddess who had this massive effect on culture. And it's hard to imagine, you know, Lady Gaga without having had Madonna. And Lady Gaga never even was as famous as Madonna. So, like, I do think she had a lot of impact and is important. But, like, hip-hop's never been bigger than this. Hip-hop is now, this generation this is the most influential hip-hop's ever been. So, like, regardless whether, you know, Kendrick could have existed if you didn't have Dr. Dre first, like, Dr. Dre ultimately never had... I mean, he's had bigger cultural impact in other ways. is, and you know, he's more of a business person than just strictly a musician. But like, in terms of music, Kendrick Lamar, I think at this point can say that he's had the most influence of any musician of our generation, and by extension, possibly the most influence of any artist of our generation. I don't know another individual artist that I think I could put on that level from the millennials, you know? Maybe a couple of manga artists, but that's really hard to say. I don't think any manga artist has yet had the impact that Akira Toriyama had, and he was either Gen X or a boomer, probably a boomer. So, I mean, I don't know how the Japanese break down their generations. I know they do it by era, not by how we do it. Oda is pretty close, yeah, but he's too close to being Akira Toriyama, just refined. You know, like, there needs to be somebody whose style is different enough from that family tree for it to be like the new representative of, like, oh wow, this is the next most influential thing, you know? Kind of the same way that, like, it's, to me, that's the same as saying Lady Gaga, you know? Like, yeah, okay, she's massively influential, but she's like Madonna in the same way that One Piece is like Dragon Ball, you know? But Kendrick Lamar is, you know, a different style that had never had that influence. Nobody else has ever gotten to the point of putting a battle rap at the #1 song in the country where he calls a guy a pedophile. Just out and out. And in a funny way, where it's like a dance song for you to get down to and laugh at Drake, you know, for being cringeworthy. Like, that's his biggest accusation to Drake, is that he's cringe. Like, it's the most millennial thing that's ever happened, for sure. And I think it's gonna be the last straw for millennials. Like, after this, all this is gonna be corny as shit in like 3 years. Like, whatever Zoomers are about to, or the next generation, Generation Alpha or whatever, about to do, that's gonna be the new wave. Like, you know, the era that Kendrick can be the most influential musician is surely coming to a close, but there's no way of knowing who's going to replace him. That person has not emerged yet, you know. But I do think this to me is like, this is as far as our culture has ever gone, and maybe will ever go. And after this, whatever happens next is not us anymore. Zoomers and Gen Alpha already consider this shit kind of cringe. Yeah, I mean, they don't know who the fuck. If you're a Zoomer, you know, why would you even care about these fucking people? You don't listen to Drake, you know? Like, probably don't listen to music on Spotify. You just watch TikToks and, like, hear songs in stores or whatever. Anyway, that's it for this stream. I might stream again later. Thanks for coming out.